English, the most spoken language in the world when we include native and non-native speakers. English is quite literally the most common used language in the world. It is a default language of tourism, international business, technology, tourism, and more. Given our recent video about mutual intelligibility, you may be wondering why aren't there many languages that are mutually intelligible with English? And that reason being is that English is actually very unique. It is a tangled mess of influences of different languages. Think of it as a Frankenstein that incorporates various elements of other languages. Linguists often refer English as a language that is weird, and this is something that we will explore today in this video. Why is English so strange to certain linguists? In order to answer this question, we will explore the evolution of English. If you like videos like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel and give us a like. So let's start learning. Hello, my name is Grisel Bennett. I'm a linguistic specialist and English educator at Unbounded Education. As discussed, we will be exploring the evolution of the English language. To start, English is a part of the Germanic language family. This language family is also home to languages such as German, Dutch, Norwegian, Swedish, and much more. If you look at this family tree of sorts, you would see that English's closest relative is a language called Scots, not to be confused with Scots Gaelic. This language is primarily spoken in Scotland and parts of Northern Ireland, with approximately 1.5 million speakers. Both Scots and modern English have developed from Middle English. There's so much history when describing the development of the language Scots in regards to its different influences and the situation in Scotland. But to be concise, Scots developed from the Northumbrian Middle English dialect. This dialect of Middle English was spoken in Scotland. This is distinctively different from the type of Middle English that modern English derived from. In other words, both languages developed from different varieties of Middle English, and this in turn enabled for them to have different evolutionary paths, and therefore creating two distinct languages. Have you ever heard what Scots sounds like? Listen to the speech given in the Scottish Parliament by Billy Kay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, for giving me this honour of addressing your National Parliament. I'd like to start with a Ken Speckle quote for Hugh MacDermott, one of the steeliest makers in Scots literature's 1,000-year history. To be yourselves and to make that worth being, nae harder job to mortals has been given.
So I kind of lied. There are some languages that have some sort of mutual intelligibility with English. For example, given the video that you just watched, you can pick up on certain things that Billy Kay is saying. Therefore, Scots and English can be described as being mutually intelligible. In addition, there are other languages that have some sort of mutual intelligibility with English. However, the bulk of them are pretty much Creole languages, one of which is Jamaican Creole, also known as Patois. This language is primarily spoken in Jamaica and the Jamaican diaspora, with about 3.2 million speakers. Similarly to Scots, Jamaican Creole can be described as developing out of English, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. However, to keep the section just a bit more concise, it could be described as Jamaican Creole splitting from early modern English. However, it has major differences from modern English due to its nature of being a Creole language, its circumstance of its being created, and the different influences from other languages such as Hindu, Spanish, and various West African languages. To give you an idea of what Jamaican Creole sounds like, I will read you an excerpt of this poem titled Teki Mislu Teki. Me a born Jamaican, I'm a proud, and you feel proud too. For walk round and big up your chest and say thanks to Miss Lou. She never know how it would have got enough people would have laugh, and I call her Papi Sure. But she got on strong, far says she knows says she right. Anytime trouble take her, she turn up strong like bull. At first, it might sound a little difficult to understand, but maybe try re-listening to it and you will see how similar they actually are. A lot of the words are really much the same. It's just the pronunciation is different. For example, the word proud is prod in Patois. So it's the same word, it's just different pronunciation. However, it's important to note that this excerpt is the basilic form of Jamaican Creole, which is the form of the language that is the most different from standard English. But as said, there are certain words that you can pick up. For example, trung for strong, tanks for thanks. These words are highly influenced by the pronunciation of West African languages. Therefore, the Basilic form of Jamaican Creole can be described as having partial intelligibility with English. Okay, but why is this important? Well, there's a common trend. All of the languages that have some sort of mutual intelligibility with English have derived from some form of English. This is very different from other languages. For example, with Spanish and Italian, they both stem from Latin and still retain some similar features which enable them to have some sort of mutual intelligibility. This is not the case for English, which is in the Germanic language family. It has gone through many independent changes like any other language. However, it doesn't have any mutual intelligibility with any other language in the Germanic language family. This is very contrasting to, for example, Dutch and German, which have some sort of mutual intelligibility. So to answer this weird dilemma, I would like to start with, outside of the realm of languages derived from English, the closest relative to English are the Frisian languages, which are known to be the sister languages of English. Dialects of Frisian are spoken across the Netherlands, Denmark, and Germany. To get a grasp of what Frisian looks like compared to English, take a look at the Lord's Prayer. As you could tell, they are not mutually intelligible at all. And why is that? English and Frisian were once a part of the same language that we could call Anglo-Frisian, and it was spoken in similar parts of where Frisian is spoken today, which are parts of the Netherlands, parts of Germany, and parts of southern Denmark. During the early medieval era, which would be around the 5th to the 11th centuries, Anglo-Frisian tribes existed in these areas. The two languages, Frisian and English, derive from different dialects of Anglo-Frisian. English derived from a dialect that is known as Old English, or also known as Anglo-Saxon. Frisian originates from a dialect that was Old Frisian. If you watched our video about mutual intelligibility, you would understand that there is something called a dialectal continuum. So these tribes spoke Anglo-Frisian on a dialectal continuum. So each tribe would essentially speak a bit differently. And one tribe would speak a particular dialect, which is known as Old Frisian. And the other would speak a dialect that would be known as Old English or Anglo-Saxon. From here on out, I would refer to the people who had the Old English variety as Anglo-Saxons. It is debatable why the Anglo-Saxons left the Anglo-Frisians alone, but it is hypothesized that they split up and went to Britain due to many pressuring factors, one of which are constant raids from the people groups in Germany, the Netherlands, and Denmark. Because of this, they were in search of new land and they ended up landing in Great Britain. After arriving in Great Britain, they ended up creating settlements and eventually kingdoms. And this was able to be done because the Roman Empire's grasp at the time in England was beginning to weaken. So at this point, Anglo-Saxon and Old Frisian were still essentially the same language, just different dialects of one another. So what made English become so different drastically? There are two major events that led to English being so different, excluding independent changes. The first being the Viking invasions of the Anglo-Saxons. The Vikings, also known as Norsemen, invaded Great Britain from between the 8th to the 11th century. Not to get into the reason of why they invaded, but these invasions happened constantly. The language at the time that the Vikings spoke was something called Old Norse. With the invasions, new vocabulary started to enter Old English or Anglo-Saxon. Words such as egg, kite, ship, etc. all began to enter English or Old English. Okay, you may be thinking, that's fine, it's just some words that entered. But it also started to change other aspects of the language. For example, Old Norse began to change the phonology of Old English, and this introduced additional sounds. For example, the sh sound in words such as shirt and ship didn't actually exist before. And this can be contributed to the Old Norse k or sk. In addition, the suffix of s to indicate possession actually comes from Old Norse, or can be contributed to Old Norse. For example, the man's sword, this is known as the genitive case. Although the genitive case already existed in Old English, the genitive case with the use of using an S was contributed to Old Norse. And something that's a bit less relevant is the introduction of words that depict places. For example, the cities York or Scarborough actually come from Old Norse. The impact that Old Norse had on English was more so on grammar and spelling. The next major influence that there was on English, I believe, is the most important and the most impactful. As said, other than the independent changes, this has, I would say, the most impact on the English language today. This particular reason is the French language. French became introduced to England in 1066 by William the Conqueror during the Norman Conquest. William the Conqueror was the Duke of Normandy in present-day France. He invaded and defeated English forces and eventually became the King of England. During his rule, he decided to make French the language of prestige. So French became the language of high society in England at the time. Afterwards, many Normans moved to England and became nobles. French began to be used as the language of administration, legal proceedings, literature, and many aspects of culture. French became the main language of high society for about 300 years in England. Although French was used primarily in high society, Old English was still being used by the locals. So with Old English still existing, many French loanwords began to be introduced into Old English as well. In addition, the grammar and the phonology began to change as well. Let's describe some of the changes. Noun plurals in Old English used to use an or as to make a noun plural. However, similar to French, English began to use just the marker s to make a noun plural. French also began to influence the pronunciation of English. French also introduced additional phonemes into English, such as the sh sound that I described earlier, but with other words. For example, chef and chaise. The origins of different words brought in additional phonemes. For example, ship came from Old Norse and chef came from French. Additionally, French accentuation, it began to influence the stress patterns of English. And English began to develop various suffixes and prefixes from French. They can be found here. Furthermore, French began to change the way things were spelt in English. For example, to spell queen, instead of the CW, it changed to QU. And the word knight, it used to not have a G, but now it adds a G. The last thing I would like to reference here is vocabulary. As French was spoken in England for such a long time, the loanwords were bound to enter English vocabulary. These words describe things across various domains, such as law, cuisine, fashion, arts, and literature. Approximately 30 to 40% of English vocabulary actually derives from French. There are various other influences that French had on English, but the video will be way too long to describe them all. But just note that all of these changes, coupled with the independent changes of English, allowed for English to be something very unique. The last thing I would like to include that makes English a bit different from the rest are the various loanwords in English as well. As stated, 30 to 40% of the words used in English are from French, but 30 to 40% of the words also in English are from Latin as well. Only about 25 to 30% of words in English are native English words or Germanic. 5 to 10% of words in English are from Greek, and there are small percentages of other languages as well. However, it is important to note that the core English words, so the most common used words in English, are native English words or Germanic in origin. This would include prepositions and other common used words. In this video, we described the intricate influences that allowed for English to be vastly different from other Germanic languages. We uncovered the complex evolution of this language. From its Germanic roots and its influences from French and Old Norse, this language has had a linguistic shift in each major historical event that has left a mark on English in regards to grammar, phonology, pronunciation, and more. English is a very unique language, and it actually can be considered a weird mix of Germanic and Romance. However, I'll leave that up to you for you to decide. I hope that you like this video. If you like videos like this, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And be sure to check out Unbounded Education if you want to learn more about English, or if you want to learn English or Portuguese. Thank you again for watching, and don't forget to keep learning.